I've been talking about this for a while, since kind of
Hmm.
like Harry Potter days. Like I've been
Yeah.
like processing this. And so a lot of the health professionals I work with were dumbfounded and were kind of scrambling to keep up. And so maybe some of the questions or some of the things that came up in the conversations only hit certain angles. You can look at basically any ethnicity, any racial group, and if you trace back far enough, you'll see man's inhumanity to man be consistent, where Europeans enslaved Europeans.
These questions are so invasive, and I hate when people ask me questions like this. So I'm gonna give you the
Oh,
option. It's no pressure, but
oh yeah,
it,
it's fine.
I
Yeah.
ask questions about your brain or like your experience with doctors, like mental health, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Do you have a DID diagnosis?
So there was some post-traumatic stress syndrome. There's that.
Hmm.
And gender identity was there. But of course, things have changed with the DSM-5. There are things that are changed. But other than that, I mean, there hasn't been a lot of extensive diagnoses. But because of what I talked about, because I've been talking about this for a while, since kind of
Hmm.
like Harry Potter days. Like I've been
Yeah.
like processing this. And so a lot of the health professionals I work with were dumbfounded and were kind of scrambling to keep up. And so maybe some of the questions or some of the things that came up in the conversations only hit certain angles, because I guess they were intrigued enough to want to learn about that. Some other questions didn't happen. So therefore, there could be some other diagnoses, but I'm not fully aware of them. Dissociative disorder, I mean, there's that, but I know that's a controversial one. Some think that that's a nullity in and of itself, and
Yeah.
but there is that. But I think there's probably more to investigate in that way.
I feel like a lot of the people who consume my content probably don't understand a lot about this, and myself also doesn't understand a lot about this. You mentioned in the end of White Girl Within, you had the fourth section, which was full of resources
Yeah.
and like extra information that was related to you, but not specifically about you. It was just like information. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about post traumatic slave syndrome? I think is the name, and like how that may have had an impact or just anything along those lines. Because I feel like a lot of people that watch me will not have familiarized themselves with that. And you mentioned it twice now, both on the call and in the book.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome, and this is just kind of a very rudimentary sort of explanation, just very basic, is the notion that there is collective trauma associated with all people who are Black, particularly Black Americans, because of the post-Atlantic slave trade, because of slavery. Race being an institution that's like 400 plus years old, the
Hmm.
notion is that there are some unique underpinnings that exist. And I get that you can look at basically any ethnicity, any racial group, and if you trace back far enough, you'll see man's inhumanity to man be consistent, where Europeans enslaved Europeans,
Yeah.
Africans enslaved. So you'll see things that aren't necessarily in the big picture unique to Black Americans in that way. Nevertheless, you have this country that's a nation of immigrants primarily, and you really have a unique situation where with Blacks, it's the only group that started out here unwillingly, whereas most other ethnic groups came here in their own volition with the notion of a better life. And so that makes it different. Now, obviously, you had Native Americans that were originally here and were upended, and that's its own travesty, its own devastation.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, they were already here. So still the dynamic is different to be brought against your will and for so long. So the notion of post-traumatic slave syndrome is that regardless of the fact if you can trace your ancestry to a slave or anything like that, just by the nature of the circumstances that the country was founded and the institutional racism that's happened for so long, that you will be impacted regardless. And there's all kinds of varying ways that trauma manifests. And because of that, one of the other quotes in the book is, Nell Painter, she's a historian and academic. She says that people of color, Black people in particular, will need a psychologist for life. I'm paraphrasing, just because of how traumatic some of the things I've just mentioned are. So yeah, so post-traumatic slave syndrome it's like this collective trauma that uniquely impacts Black people. It impacts other people too. I think if you're in this country, you're going to have some connection to that, but just in varying degrees. So that's what it is. And I would say, yeah, that there's probably untold examples in terms of how that would have impacted my consciousness, which again goes back to why, like to borrow from Malcolm X, I've spent so long attacking my ignorance and wanting to contextualize and to gain perspective. But yet, like I say, the truth of this identity, it's still here. Like I'm talking to you right now in my leggings, and I'm so happy to be doing that because it took courage to do that, but like I'm doing it, I'm loving it. So I mean, there's a lot to process, but that's in a nutshell what it is. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. I just want to make sure that the people watching this don't hear certain terms and just completely discount them. So that's why I wanted you to.
Oh, okay.
But it sounds like that kind of could be that shared social pain might be, you might be able to draw a parallel to something like the patriarchy. It sounds like PTSS, post-traumatic slave syndrome, would be correlated to like misogyny, maybe.